Welcome back to the belonging place where we focus on connection, community, and belonging. And I'm really excited today to have a good and dear friend of mine, Chelsie Hightower. Hi.
Hi. I don't know
Welcome.
why I just did that. Hi.
Welcome. Okay, so I often ask guests this. Do you remember our first meet cute? Like when we first met?
How much time do we have? Give me a second. When we first met, spark my
I don't know.
brain
I'm
is
asking
not
because
working.
most of my friends that I really care about, they're when we meet has like dissolved into just like feeling like I've always known them.
Yeah. But when?
Do you have any inkling?
No, Kai.
It's okay. It
Jog
was a
my
long
memory.
time ago. I don't also, that's what I'm saying. I think it's through,
It was most likely through Henry.
I think it's
no?
through Henry. That's
Yeah.
my inkling, I think, is
Yeah.
through our mutual friend Henry. But it's
Yeah.
been a long time.
Yeah.
So we've been friends. So
Yeah.
one of the things that many people who come and listen to this podcast will know you. Some of them won't, but I think most people will have an
Might
inkling
know.
about you.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to start off this podcast saying was that when I met you, I didn't meet you as like famous dancer Chelsie. You were just, and you are still to me,
Yeah.
just Chelsie.
Just me. Yeah.
And I find that I find just that unique, not just about our friendship, but interestingly in certain people's lives when they sort of have this big presence or when they're famous or people know them, I think it's hard for them to carve out like people who just love them for who they are. So
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
one of the things I'm really grateful about you and why I wanted to have you on the podcast is I've never really known you as that side of you. You've always just been Chelsie, very vulnerable, very open, very like willing to share like all of you with me. And I've been really grateful. Part of why I wanted you to come on this podcast was so that maybe we could talk a little bit about some of those things that I know sometimes you talk about, but it give you a space to just be like really authentic and real, which is all I know you as. Yeah. I'm not trying to say that your famous side or your dancer side is this alter ego, but I think we all have different roles in our lives.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah.
Okay,
with that, I want you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Hi.
Hi.
You want me to start with my name?
Sure.
Chelsie. I'm Chelsie.
Okay.
I don't know why this is always so awkward.
With an IE?
IE.
Because it gets spelled wrong, I'm sure.
Yeah. Grew up in Orem, Utah with 5 older brothers. Grew up in a religious home. My parents, I think growing up, we grew up in a religious community, though I didn't feel like our family always fit the mold of that religious community. So that was always interesting. An interesting dynamic. But then I found dance when I was 9 years old. That just became very quickly a huge part of my life and a huge part of my identity as a young girl into adolescence and into adulthood. And then I moved to LA and I did a show called So You Think You Can Dance when I was 18 and then Dancing with the Stars when I was 19. And just navigating adulthood ever since.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I were to strip away all those things that you have done or that you have, and I would say, hey, Chelsie, tell me who you are.
Who am I? I would say I'm a sensitive, deeply thoughtful person. I do love connection. I love this, I love deeply connecting with people. And I do find that to be such a fulfilling part of life. And moments where I feel most fulfilled is when I feel that way. I do love expression and arts. I do love dance because it just is, I can't explain it. Just this
Whole
beautiful
body inhabit it, right?
Yeah. And just this beautiful way to feel and express in a way that you don't need words for. It's just this full body feeling of freedom and expression. And I do love my family, and I'm kind of a homebody in certain ways. I love nesting. I have my apartment now that I just love nesting and being at home. But I also love performing. I've always loved performing. I've always loved the joy of being on stage and doing something that I love. So
Yeah.
I think I would consider myself like a mixture of opposites.
Okay. Because
And
that is that homebody and then that I'm on,
yeah,
right?
and very shy. Like I was incredibly shy when I was little, but when I would turn on, I would be the loudest person in the room. So yeah,
Energy and just feel. Yeah, I think
yeah,
people would be, if people only know you as Dancing with the Stars or So You Think You Can Dance, Chelsea, they would be shocked to hear that you're like this homebody, shy person, right? Because you're just like
yes,
on, right?
yeah. It's a
Yeah,
weird, yeah,
I think a lot of people have like a stage presence or like a thing that they do, and then like who they are with their everyday family, friends, and people, right?
yeah. That makes sense.
Um, you besides dancing, you also sing
For fun,
and play the guitar.
for fun.
I'm just outing
Yeah, I
you.
do.
You like to
I
write. I
do.
mean,
I do
when you
love.
say creative, just to like be specific, you like to explore lots of creative avenues besides dance. Though
Yeah,
that's the one I think you're most known for. And
yeah. My dad always played guitar, wrote music. My whole family's fairly musical, and yeah, I love that. I love to play guitar for myself at home, and anyone who will listen, honestly. So
love that.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a really big, broad question. You can take all the time that you want.
Okay.
As somebody, and this is coming from, I would never put myself in the same camp as you, but I did like dance for 13 years, and I was on my high school dance team, and I started
Yeah.
dance when I was like 6, and I did
Yes.
all the way up to point, and so like I love and experience as a child like both the good and the hard side of like
Mm,
dance and what it's like to be in a dance company and the competition. So when I
yeah.
ask this question, it's coming from like some knowledge, not as much
Yes.
as you have, but
And you
like,
have a therapeutic background as well. So,
yeah, I want to,
like, obviously,
there's two sets of this question. So setting aside the next question, which is going to be a little more therapeutic
yeah.
with the lens of like, now you have been a dancer for how many years? So if we go way back to 9, we
It's
will,
Kylie. Now you're going to tell
okay,
everyone how old I am.
generally speaking,
I'm just kidding. It's fine.
generally speaking,
It's
because
been
you're still
over,
actively dancing. So
yeah, it's been over 25.
yeah,
Wait,
okay.
25 years.
I was gonna say it's I was gonna say I feel like it's about a quarter of
Yeah.
the long lived life, right? So
Mm,
the majority of your life you have inhabited or been called or feel like you're a dancer. You
mm,
have had dance,
yeah.
and so my question is, what have you learned from that, from inhabiting, from putting the hat, from that being your identity? It's really broad, but I just
Yeah.
want you to pick wherever you want to pick. Like, what are the
Yeah.
lessons I've learned from being a dancer?
Yeah. Yeah. So many. I mean, dance has this, there is this like beautiful intersection between, well, how do I say? There is this intersection between vulnerability and also competitiveness that I think
Mm.
makes the dance world a little bit tricky and challenging sometimes. So when as growing up being a dancer and so heavily identifying myself as a dancer, there was, I think, positives to that. Like, I think I gained so much self confidence in the skill of being able to learn new skills and new techniques and new performance techniques and things that I could do with that. And the skill of putting myself out there and competing. Like, there's so many confidence building things that can come with that. And so I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about just like goal setting and learning that I could do it. Like learning that I
And
could
then
set a
beyond, right?
goal
Not just set a goal, but like move move the chain.
to the next goal. Yeah. And that was so confidence building for me, especially growing up in some instability in my home. It was like I always had this like thing that I could look to and like continue to work towards that always kept me, I think, in a positive direction in life. And that was such a blessing. And I'm so grateful for that. But then it also like just the ability to be able to feel and move my body and to be able to get into my body. And I think there were so many moments of like learning how to discern. And we talk a lot about somatics now, and that's becoming such a big thing. And I'm like, I feel so lucky that I was like learning that as a kid with no vocabulary for it, but like that I was able to use my body to like discern like this feels true to me. And a lot of that was like in the process of dancing. And I would even oddly, like when there was complexity in my life, like it was like I would imagine myself moving that would help me get to a space of clarity in my life with some of the more external things that had nothing to do with dance. And so it's really such a blessing in that way. Like the gift of movement for anyone, like whether you consider yourself a dancer or not, is like such a it's a beautiful thing. And so being having that. And then to your specific question of identifying myself as a dancer, that's such a tricky question
Yeah.
because now as an adult, I can see like, well, there was so many positives to it. And then there are also some challenges with that being your entire identity. So on the positive side, yeah, taught me a lot of beautiful things about goal setting and yeah, it just gave me so much confidence in that in my abilities.
And I want to say, okay, so for those of you who are listening who maybe haven't danced in any capacity, there's this like, I'm 6, you're 9, whatever. Do you feel like 9 was old to start dance?
Yes.
Okay, because the reason I ask you that is because
Yeah.
I started at 6, which was pretty average.
Okay, yeah.
Of all the people, but like kid
Yeah.
dance, you
Yeah.
know, like I wasn't in competitive dance until I was older.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, yeah, if you were like,
Especially when I was 12. Like when I was 12 and I got into a studio and everyone else had been at that studio since they were 3,
3,
I was
right?
like, I have to catch up on so much.
Which you did and accelerated, right?
It did drive me. Like it was this like constant like, oh, I've got to work harder. I've got to do more. I've got to try. I've got to, and it did definitely push me. But there was always that fear in the back of my mind, like I'm so far behind. Like everyone else has had so much more experience, which has been interesting because I think that that's almost been a theme throughout my career where I'm like stepping into everything, feeling like I'm just like a little bit behind everyone else, which was a blessing,
And
in
also
certain
ironic if
ways.
you look at it, because like
Oh,
how
it's-
old were you when
Makes
when
no
you
sense when you look
so
at it
you
from the
think you could
outside.
dance? How old?
18.
And how old were you
Yeah.
when you first started?
Dance with the Stars, I was 19. I think that was the first time that I was like, okay, yeah, I'm on it. Like
I'm on the track.
I'm 19 and I'm like ahead of people. But I think that's one of the tricky things too with like growing up in such a competitive environment is you're always measuring like how good am I and how can I use all of these external measuring sticks to measure where I'm at and to measure how good I am. So that was like one of the things that I hope young kids don't do anymore because it was like, okay, well, if so and so can do a triple pirouette by 11, then I've got to be able to do 4 by 14. Like there was always this like interesting ways to try and measure out like this determines how good I am and this determines my worth and this determines my and all the things that like, we
this is
should
the
not
thing.
be using to
when
determine.
when I was saying if you haven't been inhabited the world, and I don't think this is just for girls, boys, whoever, and if you were a competitive sports person, I think you can inhabit this world when I say this. So there's this thing about you start out and everyone's sort of just doing it because their parents either put them in there or because they want to and it's fun. And you look around in the dance room and you sort of can tell like who's got it and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Yourself. This is not your teacher, right? And then as you go through time, somebody else tells you who's got it and who doesn't by where they place you literally in the classroom. You're in the front row or you're not, and you're metaphorically and literally trying to get always to the front row. Now, every studio has different what that means, right? But you're trying to be in the place, and it's this conflicting thing. You don't really want to be on the front row because you don't always want to be exposed to the critical feedback. If you can hide in the back of the room and kind of, but you have to be on the front row because if you don't get the critical feedback and the correction, there's no way you're going to advance. This is where our worlds very differ because I was often not in the front row and you were always on the front row. This is not good or bad. I'm just saying from what I know about your experience, you sort of had to live on the front row always, perpetually. It was like this, I have to strive to be the best, maybe for somebody at some points and maybe for yourself. And I was never really ever that good ever. So I sort of like inhabited a different world. But I have to say, like, The things that I love about dance also have this underpinning that you talked about that I want to dig in a little bit with you. And this is my second question that I said I'm going to put to
Yeah.
the side, is that while we both agree that somatically dance lets your body express emotions in ways that no words, right? And not
Oh,
even
it's
writing,
beautiful.
where I
Yeah.
think dance can actually physiologically like release dopamine and epinephrine and like bring healing. I mean, the amount of, if you look at dancers' bodies, the amount of times they break down on things, and I'm convinced that dance itself is its own perpetual healing process. Otherwise, we just would never have dancers that make it past their senior year of high school, probably, right? Is that like there's this competition of body and soul, is how I would say it. Like, I've got to stay fit, and I've got to eat a certain amount, or I've got to exercise a certain amount, or I've got to in gymnastics they call it beat the bar. I'm not sure in dance other things, but like just as a ballet dancer, because I've never been a what's the kind of dance that
Like
you
contemporary
yeah
ballroom.
like my feet, just like how broken and terrible when I would take my but like I would live for the next time to just like do better, right? In this world where you're like, I love it and I'm feeling it and I'm passionate, and there's also this whole mental piece that
Oh,
is
yeah.
swirling around,
Yeah.
and that is talking about the other side of our bodies and the other side of our competitors and the other side of like, if I'm not this, then what am I? Because I spent so much time here. With a little bit of
Yeah.
that introduction.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the impact of that? I mean, we can call it mental health. I think that, sure, I don't think that's a fair sum up of what it is. So I'm
I
not
completely
going
agree.
to call
It's
it
so
that.
hard to say that,
But I'm
yeah.
saying with kind of that background, because I think you can
Yeah.
relate to what I just was talking about.
Oh, it's this such a strange what do you say, juxtaposition of
yeah.
like, we have this beautiful thing that is so therapeutic in so many ways, and then you add in the competition element and the comparative element and the judgment element, and it makes this like vulnerable and beautiful thing, because dance at its core and at its best is very soulful and very
I can just
vulnerable.
bring people to tears. The amount of times I've watched a performance and just,
Yeah,
right?
100%. And so then when you add in the competition element, and I think it's dance differs from sports and even other art forms because it is so competitive. And so with sports, you look at like, I don't know how deep you want to get into
Yeah,
this,
go,
by the
go.
way. Like, I could go for a
Deep,
while on
deep.
this. But it's because I've thought about it a lot, because I'm now kind of on the other side looking back and going like, wow, there's so many things to unpack there. And so many of my friends who've like moved on from dance, and they're like, oh, I have so much trauma from dance. But when you're in it, you kind of don't realize
Yeah.
how it's impacting you in that way. And then you try to adjust to like,
It's like
oh,
a spinning
this is
top,
normal.
literally, right? And then
Yeah.
until you have
Yeah.
enough time and space to stop, and then it's like,
And you can look at it from the outside, you know, and it's not, you're not still in it so much. And this is not to say that there's not beautiful people in dance who I do believe have a very healthy relationship with it. And I think there's so many factors that go into whether you do have a healthy relationship with it and you're able to manage all of these factors, which I think a strong support system at home is a huge part of that. But if you don't have some of that, and there is some trauma at home or things happening at home, you get into the dance world, and it's almost
trauma
like
with
this,
your body.
yes, and youth, and it's almost this feeling of like, oh, I can get this it feels like a solution, and not for someone who's been through some trauma. It feels like a solution and also a,
Detriment, right?
yeah, like something that perpetuates the fear or something that perpetuates like the original injury.
Yeah.
So it's this thing where it's like, oh, I can be perfect in this, and I can have accomplishment in this, and I can express in this, but then there's this flip side of like, oh, but there's this, if
The
I
opportunity
don't reach
cost
that,
of that.
yeah,
If I can be perfect, and if I can be seen and I can perform, what's the cost?
and it can perpetuate some of that very same insecurity that you were trying to mitigate or you were trying to solve.
So if we go from big to you,
Yeah.
is that okay?
You did ask me a question that I didn't fully answer.
Yeah, I want to go
But
to
we can
you
go
if
back.
you're willing, just because some
Totally.
of my favorite
Yeah.
moments I've had with you was some of this personal insight this metacognition you've had about like that journey And
Yeah.
specifically, you've shared on other podcasts and stuff, anxiety. We can name it, we can not name it, but like, what has your relationship with that other side been, and what does it look like, and what have you learned, and what do you want to tell people? Because
Yeah.
mostly it's like
Yeah.
when we learn things, we want to give back, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sensitive about this because I do understand my experience is not going to be everyone's experience, but there are certain universal things that everyone will go through that are that the catalyst may be different, but the feelings ultimately are universal. Um, and so I'm sensitive in the way I talk about this because I do understand that there are some people who will never have these challenges, and or if they do, they'll be able to mitigate and work through them in a way that's not as detrimental. Anyways,
And this other side of this group, I just want to say to you, if just to help in this process, it's very permission giving. It's
yeah.
very connecting.
Yeah.
That as you start to tell your story, I think there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of dancers, a lot of people that aren't even dancers that will relate to
Yeah.
some of the things you're going to share. So
Yeah.
thank
I
you
I do.
ahead of
You're
time
welcome.
for being open. Yeah.
No, I think that there is a common feeling of this fear of not being good enough in this industry. And so again, when you're already lacking that emotional support at home and you come into something like this, an industry like this where it's perpetuating self-doubt, and it feels like a petri dish for like self-doubt and anxiety and doubting your worth. And I think that's the biggest thing that I look back on and I can see like the big moments of um, why things were so hard for me was because it was so related to my sense of worth and my idea of why I was valuable in the world, why I was worthy.
Why you mattered, right? I matter
Why,
because,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I started dance when I was 9. It was like, I was really shy. I know we've said this before, but I was very shy before that. Um, and so when I started, it was like the first time that I was like, wow, I feel like this thing just feels like home. It was very confidence building. Um, and I went into a jazz studio, and like you said, I was lucky enough to be short and skilled. And so
Just for the record, I wasn't saying what I said because you were short.
no, but that was
I
always
want to set
like,
the record straight.
yeah,
It's
no.
because you're talented,
But I
which I think is
did
its own double-edged sword, which you're probably going to talk about. Yeah.
would right. Like there's challenges any way you look at it, right? Like because then it was like this expectation of not even so much other people, but of myself, of like, oh, now I know what I can accomplish, and now this is where I expect myself to be. But a lot of that was also because I felt like I was relating my identity to like, I'm a good dancer. I'm the best dancer. And so
Yeah.
now when I go
And
into a
people
new
were telling you
environment,
that too, right? Feeding back
yeah,
to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably. But then now my identity is so attached to this idea of like, I'm a good dancer that like go, and then I went into ballroom competitively for the next 2 years, and I'd never experienced like ballroom or anything on that level where it was international. We were traveling all around the world. We were traveling around the nation. We were getting dresses from London, and they were, 1,000, and I'm 14 at this point, but it's kind of insane when you look at it now. Like,
Yeah.
who was doing that and why? But that is the industry.
It's a world that needs its own behind the scenes
Look,
documentary.
yeah.
I
It's
only
like Strictly Ballroom.
yes, I only say that because I had a
Yeah.
roommate in college who was a ballroom dancer at
Yeah.
BYU, and when she would get ready for competition, I would have to paint her body tan, like
Yep.
paint her. I mean,
Yeah.
at 14, were you painting your body tan?
Yeah. L'Oreal. You know the L'Oreal? That was
But I
my
mean,
go-to.
this is a world I didn't
Every
know until, and then it's all
Yeah.
it's sequins and it's high heeled nude shoes and it's
It is
I can't even get into it. Like,
expensive. Like, it's yeah, these
but
dresses are
she's 20, you're 14. I'm
Yeah.
saying you're inhabiting a college or an adult person's competitive world and all that it has to do at 14.
Yeah.
And can your family afford all the expenses?
Yeah.
And is its own.
So interesting. Yeah. It's interesting you asked that. No, my family was not the rich family. And so that was interesting for me to feel like I don't belong here in certain ways. Like I feel like a fish out of water in this environment, but not everyone was that way. Like there was lots of families that were struggling. I was just in a very, um, I was just in an interesting environment where I was like the only one out of this family. I don't know how to tell this without telling details. Just cut that out. Because I don't really want to mention their names, but
That's fine.
anyways, but to the point.
In an elite, but you were part of an elite company, and they were traveling all over the world, and that comes with its own financial burdens. It comes with its own, like,
Yeah.
I'm 14 and
Yeah, we were getting a lot of help financially from my partner's parents, which was great. And then we actually got sponsored training from, it was a very unique situation that I'm like, it was so unique that I did feel like it was like divine intervention. And at the time, it was like, this feels like this is something that I'm supposed to be doing. I'm meant to do. And so I'm going to do it. But it was such a unique situation where I was getting sponsored training and help that there was no other way that I would have been
Right.
able to have afforded that training. This is when I went from the jazz studio to a ballroom
Got it.
studio. It was a private studio. I was competing with the nephew of the person who was bringing all the coaches in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
and he actually had a giant ballroom in his house. So he was like just very, very wealthy. Beautiful mansion, giant ballroom in his house, and he would fly coaches in.
Yeah.
So,
And at
it was
14,
interesting.
it's like, is it equal parts like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, it's so amazing, and equal parts like,
Yeah.
what in the world?
100%. Like,
And the what in the world you can't really share, right? Because you have to be grateful, and you have to
Yes.
you have to show up
I'm
like,
yes, 100%. Yeah.
So-
it was interesting.
you're holding all that. Because do you have people to say, hey, by the way, this is overwhelming, this is a lot? Do you even have your own language to say, hey, by
No,
the
and
way,
not
this
only
is
that, it
overwhelming?
was like, no, and not only that, it was like, mom is dealing with a lot of stuff at home, so she's kind of, and she had to go back to work at that time. But then also, it was my coaches that were also expecting, me to walk into this situation and immediately be a champion. And
No
that was a
pressure,
lot.
pressure.
Like, we did our first national competition within the first 2 weeks of me meeting this partner for the first time. Learned 10 dances. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm ungrateful, but it was just very complex.
Yeah.
That
Can
it's
we be
like,
both? There's
yeah.
in the mental health world, we have the dichotomy, right? Like, can I grieve and be grateful? Can I be grateful for all that I had and also recognize that as a 14-year-old knew it was extremely a lot of pressure and very hard. I don't think
Yeah.
one has to be without the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you
So then I after that first competition, I'd learned 10 dances, competed in this national competition for the first time, walked off the floor. My vision starts going black. My ears are ringing. My body feels cold and racing thoughts. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm not good enough. Like, I'm just not good enough. And that just going through my head, like, over and over, like, I'm not good enough. Nobody else is experiencing this. And for some reason, it was just like, I had enough awareness, I think, to know that, like, when I was confident, I didn't feel that anxiety. And so it must be that I'm not good enough. And all the factors of, like, I'm not ready for this. Like, I'm just not good enough. And I feel I don't feel like I belong in this situation. And certainly I wasn't ready. And then I got home. And so that was like the first time I'd really experienced, like, oh, something happened in my body.
and nobody had a name for it back then.
No.
Like,
And
just because we are now in 2024 in a very sort of generally good knowledge about anxiety and mental health, but back then nobody was talking about it, and nobody was naming it, and we would not have called that a panic attack or any version of that. It just had no name, right? You're feeling. And can I ask you this? At the time, did you think that was this like an imposter syndrome, like you really were good enough and you really were competing on every level, or was it a genuine like I am being pushed beyond
really
my ability?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think it was really like, this is too much.
Yeah.
And I really am not good enough. But I think there was a lot of shame in that, like, because there was no one for me to sort of talk to after that
Yeah,
experience.
and to say you're good, you're fine,
And to say,
you're
like,
everything.
I
Like,
am not ready. Like,
or
I should
saying,
not
yeah,
be.
let's take a break. Let's pause. There was just no.
There was no one to
You were
work
on the
through with
conveyor
my
belt, and it was
emotions.
going.
Oh, yeah. And so it was like, you better keep up, or I don't know. And I think because so much of my confidence was now wrapped around this identity of being a dancer,
and
that
your
it was
worth
like,
that you said earlier. It's like, if
yeah,
I get off this train, what is left?
yeah, it is a weird thing. And I do think, I spoke to some universal things that dancers feel, and I do think that is somewhat universal, of dancers feeling this, like, so much of my identity is in this, that if this doesn't work out, I'm gonna die.
I don't have a plan B. Like, you
Yeah,
can't have a
like,
plan B if you're going to be the best.
it is, and it is like almost this feeling of death. Like, that sounds so
It doesn't.
dramatic, but it is like, who am I? Like,
If you ask any Olympian who've put every bit, no, but it doesn't matter how old they are, right?
Yes.
And I would consider this that type of.
where they put all of their life into.
I don't think it's like wild to say, like, and they're looking ahead and they're like, I'm 22 and I don't know what to do with the rest of my life, because all I've ever been, all I've ever done, all the sacrifices, all the things I didn't do because I chose this, right? Like,
Yeah, and I think it also creates this idea of, like, if I don't succeed, then who will I be? And so there's all of this underlying pressure too of, like, I have to succeed. Not really realizing that so much of, for me, I will say, not realizing so much of my worth was dependent on, or in confidence was
entangled in that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
very intertwined. So that was very intense for me at 14. And then I came home and my coach was like, reamed me for, like, I just had this experience where I'm like, I don't know what just happened.
Yeah.
I'm
This
not
body
ready
that
for
I love and that
this.
has done it is kind of like attacking itself, or it's
100%.
like,
And I look back to 3 months ago where I was thriving in this dance studio, never experienced anxiety, like, felt so confident, felt so joyous and grateful to have this, like, beautiful thing in my life, to now being, like, completely on the opposite end of that, being like, I am not good enough. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to control this panic and anxiety that I'm feeling and all of my thoughts, and I have to keep up because this is the pressure that I'm getting from
there's
my
nowhere to
coaches.
put that. It's just like, put it on the shelf and get back in the studio
and get better.
Yeah.
So then I got home and my coach was like, you had no performance, your stamina was terrible, just, like, goes on and on and on. And I was just like, the shame, just was like going up more. And
I'm sorry, little Chelsie.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm, like, still working through it in therapy, so it's fine. But it was just, and for me, she was one of the best coaches in the world. And so it was, what she said was true.
Yeah, the gospel truth.
I couldn't deny, like, yeah, she's right. Like, my stamina was terrible. And I didn't have the awareness that I had, I would say, a few years later. Of,
well, you
like,
were can we just
14.
reiterate? Sorry, I know we're laughing. It's very serious, but
it
like,
was
you're
good to add
14.
some love
You know what
into
I'm
it.
saying?
Yeah.
Like, do we expect 14-year-olds to have that kind
I
of?
know.
No.
That is
And
exactly.
should we expect
Yeah.
a 14-year-old to carry that weight?
No.
Especially with no outlet and no ability to sort of, like, what do I do? Even if I want to keep competing.
Yeah. And I don't have a choice. Like, in my mind, I wasn't going to stop. Like,
you were already on.
I had experienced also, like, the joy of dance. Like, I wasn't going to stop.
Almost the addictive pull.
I just have to get back to where I was that idea in my mind. Like, I'm not going to stop. I just need to, I have to figure out how to get back to that place. And all I knew, I didn't understand the environmental factors that was playing into it. I didn't even give credit to, like, well, I just got in here. I didn't give myself that grace of, like, no, in my mind, it was like, my coaches are expecting this of me. And so this must be what I need. Like, this must be,
I got to get
the expectation. Like,
I
have
to be there yesterday.
Yeah.
So I will.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
and let me just say this, because you won't say this. And because you did and could, I think that also contributed, because there's a world
Mm,
where many dancers could meet you where you are at this point in your story,
mm,
and really they didn't have they I mean, this is this world we live in. They just didn't have the talent or couldn't push it beyond, and there's a
mm.
different story, right? I think part of the heartbreak and the joy of your story is that at this point, like, you had so much more in the gas tank as far as dance goes. I mean, we're sitting on the precipice of the explosion of Chelsie Hightower, right? Like, and so this is, you won't brag about you, but I will, and I will say this is part of the cut, right?
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
part of the cut is that,
Yeah.
like, you're feeling shame, and yeah, you're feeling like this, but like your coach says do better, and you do.
Mm.
You have it, you learn it, you gain it, and you're
I think I think what was hard for me too is like I knew I'd seen my potential too. Like I known and I went okay. I'm always so hesitant because I'm like I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but like at 12 years old I did from a in a 2-year time span I grew like very quickly um because I cared and I wanted it and I was so focused and I was like given lots of I was given talent and I was so
you worked
happy and
really
so
hard for
grateful
that
for that. And I
talent.
did work
Yeah,
really hard.
both,
But like
right?
I went from like being a beginner truly to like really being a competitor and really being able to compete with people who had competed for many years. And so it just sounds so weird saying that,
But that's your truth. The
I
reason why I want
knew
you to bring that part of the story in is because there's so many things that get stacked, right? If you're a mediocre dancer and people are complaining at you, like, get better, and you're like, I feel shameful, like,
mm,
this is a different story. The story
yeah,
of, like, because I can, I do, and because I am talented, I can, and means that, like, the shame and the things, it's just stuffing, you're
it's
just
just different. Yeah.
stuffing it in,
It's just
right? Because
different. Yeah.
you're going out and you're executing when they
It's a
say do
different
better.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I truly believe like none of us, well, and this is true. Like none of us get out of this world without or leave this world without our own challenges, and you can't really. There's no comparison because it's not like they're just different and they are
Yeah.
just different unique challenges and every point that you're at is going to create its own version of challenge for you, whether that's you're at the beginning or you're at the or you're here or you're here, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
like it's going to
Messy
have
middle, begin with the end in mind. Yeah.
yeah
Wherever you
you're going to
are.
have your own set of challenges and
Okay.
again like I think the more emotional awareness we have the more we're able to nurture ourselves like the better and the more easily we're able to handle some of that stuff but yeah it's all different like it's just different and so
So
there
you're
was that
coach. So you're
expectation
14. You get off. You're like, whoa, what's happening? Your coach is kind of reaming you.
and there was that expectation of myself of like I know what my potential is and I've seen what I can do when I'm like really dialed in and when I'm really but with this anxiety I can't dial in because so much is happening and I didn't have a name for it and so I couldn't be like hi anxiety like you're not me.
Also, anxiety, just for those who are listening, in and of itself as a challenge, it is literally the opposite of being present, which is what is required to
Yeah.
be a really good dancer, right? You've got to be really present,
So in the
feet
moment.
grounded into yourself. I mean, anybody
Yeah.
who's ever been in dance, it's like a pull from your head to your core. I mean, I'm saying things that, like, I'm not a competitive dancer by any means, but I'm saying anxiety is literally the opposite of that.
Yeah.
It couldn't pull you further away from being present. It's your brain and your body, so
Yes.
you've got these centrifugal forces, like, that are spinning literally against each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what does that do for you, or how do you deal with, like, yeah, what happens next in the story?
How do I deal with that? It was a lot. I don't know. Like I just struggled for the next few years. And I think it's funny because I would after that people would I would hear what people would say and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, she's nice if she likes you." Or like or stuff like that. Like I won't say everything I heard, but it was interesting because what was being seen or what people were seeing from me was such a different experience than what I was feeling inside because it was like I was just trying to manage and like stay okay and trying to like keep things together. Um, so that was interesting. Like I was like, oh, if you only knew, like it had nothing to do
If
with
you knew how many
you.
plates I was spinning to just show up and put on the dress and
Yeah, like I
do the
didn't think I
dance.
was like I wasn't trying to at least to put this idea out that I was um better than other people, or I was just trying to I was almost like had a mask up of like I'm okay, which I do think came across maybe as that like, oh, she thinks she's better than other people. But it was really just like I'm just trying to
It's
like
also
hold it together.
protecting yourself from not spilling out everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so I did struggle for the next few years, um
and the competition got higher, more pressure, right? We're not like
yeah.
linear in dance. We're like,
There was a point where I'll say that coach that was really, really tough on me, and she never got easier, which never helped. She never got easier on me. She was going through her own things, and I had a sense of that. Like, this isn't all about me at that time, but it was still really hurtful because it was like I'm still depending on you to tell me how good I'm doing or to tell me what I need to fix and
some
how
kind
do
of
I get
balance
there.
of like,
Yeah.
this is good and let's work on this,
Yeah.
right? But it was out of balance.
It was never my partner's fault. It was just always like hammering me for everything. Um, and so that was just, it was just like, I'm like, this is so much. Like, I am dealing with a lot inside. I'm dealing
Yeah.
with my own pressure and expectations. And I'm just suffocated this, by this coming at me
Yeah,
from
flooded. Like
myself,
in therapy,
from,
we're like, you're just flooded. You're overstimulated. There's too many inputs. There's not enough outputs. But I
yeah,
have to go output on a level that's like Olympic level every
yeah,
time I'm on stage. It's just
yeah.
like that
That was the expectation, right?
dissonance between
Did I
those two.
have to? No. But looking back, I'm like, no, I didn't have to. I didn't have to measure up to that expectation because it wasn't even realistic, but I had to
Yeah.
because of the expectation.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd known that. Like I wish I'd known that I didn't have to measure up to this like perfection, but it was
Like release some of that pressure and infuse more joy. Like I do it because I love it and I want to
and
do it
like
because I love it. And
welcome mess ups and like welcome imperfection and welcome like the process of like I'm still new and I'm still
grace, you
learning
said it
and
earlier, giving
yeah.
myself some grace. It doesn't let me off the hook to like get better, but
Mm-hmm.
it can validate where I am in the process, right?
Mm-hmm. And there's a whole like iceberg of like childhood at home stuff that's playing into this as well. That's a huge piece of it. But um so where did
Yeah,
I go?
so like the coach and you are trying to figure out kind of some of the mental health and stuff that's going along.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're 14 or 15 at this point in the story. So where does
Mm-hmm.
this, I mean, you told us So You Think It Can Dance is like
So
18. So where do we go?
So the teacher, that coach wasn't our coach. We got new coaches in. That definitely did help. But then from there, then I was like, so that partnership ended, that chapter ended, and I was looking to the next chapter of like, okay, well, what do I want to do now? Um, So You Think You Can Dance came on air, and I was like, that feels like something I would love to do. I would love to like be able to do all the styles and go back to doing the other styles that I just loved so much. And so I'm like, I'm going to work for that. I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure out what's happening inside and overcome this so that I can then put myself, so I can go on to this and I can actually have a real shot at this and, and not let this just completely shut me down because this is what I'd experienced for the 2 previous years. And I think I felt a huge loss of like, I never felt like I reached my potential in that setting. And I was really sad. Like felt like a huge loss to me because I was just struggling so much that whole time. And so I was like, I'll do whatever it takes, like whatever it takes to overcome this so that I can feel free and I can do what I want to do. So I found The Secret, the book. And because again, we didn't have mental health tools readily available to us. Therapy was very looked down on at that time. It was
Stigmatized.
very taboo.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very stigmatized. And especially being in a religion that's like, you don't need therapy. You need God.
Have more faith.
Yeah,
Come on, Chelsie.
Come on.
Pray
It's just,
more.
and yeah, not that the church was saying that, but that's what we usually take from the church. I'm not going to say,
But even back then with mental health or other things, it was a little still like just work harder. Just pull yourself up from your
oh,
bootstraps. Just like,
override every
or
part.
this thing that even you're battling as we talk, this other side of this that was like, how can you complain? Look at
It's
all the
so
choices
good.
you had and all the chances you had.
Yeah.
This other side of the world, if the world isn't saying it, you clearly still are feeling this. Like, I can't really talk about the underbelly of my experience.
I know, because I'm also like, I don't want to
because
be dumping on everyone.
right, but this
Yeah.
exists still. But I'm saying it
Right.
really, really, really existed back then. There wasn't
Yeah.
this like, you
Oh, there was
can't
always-
say I'm struggling because look at all the good and the joy and
Yeah.
the opportunities you have. You could. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna go back and say you can at any point in your life, obviously, but not really, right?
Mhm.
So you're sort of like wanting to do so you think you can dance, wanting to figure this out. You find
Yeah.
this book, which I'm
Yeah,
making
I mean, I was
books
just,
and
yeah, my biggest thing was like, I'd felt sort of when you are in anxiety, how you just feel like you're chained, like you just can't break free. And it's the cyclical, like, thing that if you don't know what's going on, you don't know how to deal with it, it just feels like you're just burdened with these, this anxiety, these chains. So my biggest thing was like, if I can, I will, yeah, I'll do anything to just like get,
take the chains off.
yeah. And the only thing I knew, I think at the time, was like, well, when I was good enough, I didn't feel anxiety. So this must be that I just need to be good enough. I need to be better, and I need to be, I need to prove myself in some way, so that I don't feel this like sense of insecurity that I'd felt about my skill and my talent. Um, Not taking into account like environmental factors, safety, like how safe do you feel? How seen do you feel? How heard do you feel? None of that. I had any awareness of that was affecting me. Um, and that was playing into how
And for the sake
secure
of
I felt.
this podcast, a lot of isolation amongst a lot of people, right? Because this
yeah.
is something that when we're talking about the belonging place, this is one of the elements I want to highlight. It's like you can be surrounded by a lot of helpful people and feel really alone and isolated. You've said this a few times. I want to emphasize this because, and I'm good with you keeping whatever you want out, but there's a lot of family stuff going down. And so we're focusing on the sort of the dance side and the mental health, but like this piece, like you had hinted at it earlier, that, some people have a better go of it because they have this really safe home, and this is not vilifying your family or parents at all, but like depending on the stability that you have, that gives you a more opportunity to fail. If you know that whatever you do, you can just go home, or things are going to be fine, or people love me, or I have this supportive, like almost like a safety net, then it's like, I don't have to be 100% good. I don't have to like always be on because someone will catch me. But if you don't feel or don't know or know that you don't have a safety net, then you don't have an out, right? Which is its own anxiety and isolation.
Yeah.
As you talk about it, that feeling, I think, to emphasize, like, that's hard. I mean, hard is not even a word. It's like you're disappearing inside yourself, even though you're on stage and you're performing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then
Yeah.
what? So then what do you do? How do you figure out how to take off the chains at this point, or no?
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing. Like, and even as you talk, I've been listening to Brene Brown recently.
Yeah.
And she talks about perfectionism and how when you're rewarded for achievements at home, and that could be behavioral achievements, that could be like being a good girl, which I did feel that a lot at home. It's like, okay, you do get this sense of like, my value is in my achievement. My
Or
value
pretty, if you're
is
really
in,
pretty and people are like, oh, you're really pretty.
yeah. My value is in how I perform and how I show up. Not as much in like me being able to be me.
Who I am.
And so the idea of failure is like, oh, no. Like, you just can't, that's not even an option, like, no, if I fail, like, no, I have to be this. It feels like it's not an option, right? Like, I have to be this, even behaviorally, like, interestingly, there was almost this idea of like, I've got to show up behaviorally perfect. Like, if I can't like have a bad emotion. I can't have like negative thoughts or self-doubts or anxiety, like, and so then that creates another layer of complexity of like,
If you have
this
chinks in the armor
anxiety.
and somebody sees it, what happens if you spill all out all through it? No, we have to.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there's this other layer of complexity too, where you then judge the negative emotions that you're having instead of, because you're not supposed to have those.
Yeah.
So
Because you have all these things. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So so this idea of like the secret of like, oh, I can attract things to me.
The world will conspire for my good is one of the
Was
truths.
like really interesting. I'm not even sure how to like completely articulate this, but I think with that idea of like, it created this sense that I could create this perfect me or this perfect like world. I could be behaviorally, like, I could show up behaviorally just right. I can dance just right. Um,
I can be the perfect daughter,
yeah,
sister.
I can be this good girl, right? That's
I can
expected of me.
overcompensate for what's not going well here by,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And this is all within my control, right? And I think that was the biggest
That
lie.
you think it's all in your
That was
control.
the biggest
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah.
It's like, I can do this and this is my responsibility and this is all in my control. And so it really worked at first, where it was like, oh, I can just create this future, which is, there's so much truth in that. Like, yeah, you can create a future. But there's that lie of like, well, it's not really all in your control, and there are these factors that are not fully in your control, and you can't control the will of others, and you can't control someone else's agency. And but as a performer, it really worked, because it was like, because I can create the environment that I want to, that I would thrive in based off of what I believe.
You could
And
pick the place where you knew you would grow the best, right?
yeah.
And the illusion lives on because it's like, I am.
Mm-hmm.
And is this so you think you can dance?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but then there was a spiritual aspect to it too, where I did feel, just because I was like, I'll do whatever it takes, like, I've got to just figure this out. So that was a catalyst. The secret was a catalyst. And then there was another part of it that, because of my background with my relationship with God and knowing what that feels like, knowing his love, knowing how real that can be and how palpable that can be, that was a grounding factor to me. That was really important. So there was a spiritual factor, and then there was this like psychological factor that sometimes competed against each other, because God would say, you're good just as you are.
You're inherently worthy.
You're inherently worthy. Whereas the psychological factor, because of some of my background in trauma, would say, no, that's fine, but like, you can be perfect.
But really, that's all nice and good. But really,
yeah, I don't know. It's this
work
weird
harder,
thing.
be better,
Yeah.
show up.
Yeah, it was this weird thing. So that created some sort of internal conflict. And I laugh, but really it's because it's like, it's so complex when I say it out loud.
So complex and so relatable. Can I just say, yes, we're talking about you, Chelsie, but like the amount of people in their lives that have had this competing, like the world or people and like God, and if it's not God, it's whatever your spiritual bounding or your philosophy, and then they have mental health stuff that's going on. They have physical. I mean, and we haven't delved into this, but there's also like how I feel about my actual body and how much people in dance talk about your physical body, and are you skinny enough, and are you all the things, right?
So many,
and are you too skinny, or are you this, or like can you fit in this costume, and what about this, and like it's not just like it's so complex. And you're swimming, and part of you is like pulling away a little bit and saying, I recognize there's some things going on, and part of you is just swimming forward into the like, but this is the story that I've created, and this is what I'm good at. And and then you get to,
so,
is it a dream at the time? Is it like, I wanted
totally
to be on So You Think You Can Dance?
I loved it was, and truly, like, there were some definite cognitive distortions. I can use therapy talk here.
Yeah, of course.
There was some definite like distortions that I had, but also there was a lot of truth in it. There was a lot of truth in this space that I came into. There was a lot of truth, and like the more I leaned into the spiritual side and the more I listened to what is my spirit telling me, what is God telling me, the more like there was that understanding to an extent. And there was that understanding of like, no, I am worthy as I am, and I am
And I'm right where I should be.
God's daughter. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
am right where, and I'm not in a race. But it was hard to compete with that like external pressure. But there was a lot of anxiety that was relieved from going back to those spiritual truths of like who I am as a daughter of God, and knowing my worthy, and really like working from the soul level,
Mm.
because it does get into this. And I think this can be across the board of anytime you're competing in something, there is rewards for results. If that foundation is a little bit, if we're confused at all about where our worth comes from, it's easy to be like, oh, I got to get that result so that I can feel more worthy. I gotta get that acknowledgement or that
There's a
accolade.
behavior chain analysis, right? That comes back that says A plus B equals C. And if
Yeah.
you aren't anchored in your truth already, then like the amount of willingness we're willing to bend, even break to get here is wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So the more I did, like there was a lot of I learned a lot of truth about that. Like the more I came back to my center, my worth, my identity, not as a dancer, but as who I am as a daughter of God, the more I was able to let go of the results, and the better the result would get. But then there's this like funny thing that can happen too of like, well, I got to come back to that if I want to get a good result. And anyways, so
The
there's
tugs and
complexity.
pulls, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but continuing to anchor myself in the spiritual principles was very transformational, and I learned so much at that time. And at that time it was like I felt like that was my biggest accomplishment, was like just being able to overcome the chains that I had been in the years previously. Because I would, like I said, I would have done anything. I wish I'd known a little bit more about therapy and like been able to balance out the cognitive part. But,
Can I ask you
anyways,
this? From the outside fan base, when you're in So You Think You Can Dance, are you blowing up? Like I wasn't friends with you back then.
yeah,
I know from the outside
it
because I
didn't
watched.
feel
Were
like it, I will
you
say.
like,
I
or
was like
were you
so
on the
much in my
precipice?
own world.
Did you not kind of bump into
It
that
wasn't
until
until
Dancing with
Dancing
the
with the
Stars? Okay,
Stars. I feel like So You Think You Can Dance was such a niche like fan base.
okay,
And I think that's what made it so special at that
okay.
time, was it was just this like niche fan base who was just like so loyal to that show, because it was new and it was before like none of us were polished. Like
But let's be real.
it was like,
Everybody who's ever been on that show is like the most epic dancers. You say unpolished, I say it's like wow.
well, there's so many good dancers, and like and it is like it's still casting to an extent.
Yes.
Um, but I will say in the early days, it was just so new and fresh, and like
What season are we talking about?
four,
Okay.
way back when.
Just
It was just so new and fresh, where like none of us knew how to interview well. Like we were just being ourselves, I think,
oh
for the
yeah.
most
But
part.
that's one of
Like,
my favorite things about going and watching is just everyone's just like real.
yeah, yeah, which I think no one knew how to like work the system. No one was trying to work the system per se at that time.
Just wanting to dance and wanting to do it well
Yeah,
and
like
having
kids are
fun
so
and
good
yeah.
now. Like they just go in and everyone knows every style and they're just like crushing it. But back then it was truly like you're watching people really have a hard time with one style because they truly hadn't done it. Or so there was just a lot more um authenticity, I think,
Yeah.
at that
A
time.
lot more
So
vulnerability too, because to put
yeah,
yourself on front of a screen and like try something new with everybody, well,
yeah,
everybody that's that cult
yeah,
following's watching is pretty
yeah,
brave.
yeah. Oh, totally, 100%. But yeah, it was so fun. Like loved it. Um, Yeah, it was just a dream. And then what happened? And then I
Did you
moved to
come
LA.
to Dancing with? Did they find you from So You Think You Can Dance? Did you find them, or what's the
Yeah.
jump? Okay.
So they called me from From dancing. Yeah, from So You Think You Can Dance.
And was that on your radar, in your dream card, in your bingo card, in your what I want to do when I grow up? Was
To be
Dancing with the
honest,
Stars? Like,
to be honest, one of my coaches, Karina Smirnoff, she was like, there's this new show. It's big in England. I really want to do it. They're just bringing it to America. And I remember thinking, like, why would you ever want to do that?
really?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Because I was like, you are like one of the best dancers in the world. Like, why would you want to go on this silly TV show? And, but that was my
Yeah.
that was my mentality on it. Like, my mom wanted me to like watch it several years later. She'd be like, come watch Dancing with the Stars. And I'd be like, I don't want to watch bad dancing. Because I'm like, they're celebrities. It's great. But like, I'm in this
But you
phase
were
where
a
like, I want to be the
competitive already.
best.
Yeah.
So it didn't make any sense to me. So when I got on the show, I had never watched an episode before. And I'm coming from this like very high expectations
Yeah,
of
of course.
myself, this competitive, like, I've still got to prove myself. So it was a very interesting thing going into that at 19 when I'm like, I'm still so young. Like, I feel like I still want to be training. I still want to be learning. I still want to be growing.
And all of a sudden, you're the coach.
I need to have all
You're
the answers.
person. You're the choreographer.
Yeah.
You're all, yeah.
Yeah. So going into it was very overwhelming. Like, it was just very overwhelming. And I'm like there with like Karina, Louie, who were coaching me like 2 years previously. And in my mind, I'm like, this is a competition. Like, I'm competing against these people. Like, there's no way. Like, this is.
I compete, in a sense, I'm competing against my coaches.
Yeah. And I knew like on a logical level, this is entertainment. But like, I'm like, but I still like need to prove myself.
But every time I'm out there, I'm making a statement one way or the other, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it was overwhelming going into it. And I luckily had the best partner Ty Murray, who he's a rodeo cowboy, the best. Like, he's just like, he was such a rock and so incredible. Like, yeah, just still one of my favorite partners to this day. But he was I'm so grateful I got him for my first season because he was so solid. Like, and it's funny because Jewel and I had we would have talks about this because I think one thing that attracted her to him was that he was so solid and she had all these mental health struggles in the past and had dealt with anxiety. And so her and I would relate on that level when we talk about that. But it was so nice to have him who was
Just
such
grounded,
a rock.
solid.
Yeah. And he helped so much with some of my racing thoughts because he was just so solid.
Steady.
So, and then I helped him, learn how to dance. So it worked out.
So we haven't talked much about this, but in the teaching somebody about something you love, tell me about that. Did you like it? Was it hard? What, like?
Teaching, what do you mean?
Like, so you just said, so then you get to teach him how to dance. Like,
yeah.
Was this exciting a part of this, or was this hard also because you're like, I'm a competitive dancer?
Oh, it's so long ago. It's hard to like think back to that. As you're talking about, I feel just grateful. Like, I feel a sense of gratitude because it was just overall, it was challenging, it was difficult, but it was so rewarding at the same time. I liked teaching Ty. It sort of depended on who it was.
Yeah, that's fair.
He was so like such a hard worker and so willing to do whatever.
And receiving.
Yeah.
So I asked you this earlier, but like, okay, so in your words, and it's okay at this point because I'm asking you to do a little bragging. Like, how big do you get? Does your world that you're small, shy? I'm just kind of evolving in my world. How are you all of a sudden recognized? I guess through the time of dancing. So maybe not just like that right here, but through your time with Dancing with the Stars, do you go from a level of like nobody really knows who I am to like I'm walking in places and people know who I am?
I think it's really hard to gauge like how big you are. Like,
but I'm saying from your eyes though, did you go from a like, if we were to step inside of you at that time, like, were you already pretty known in the ballroom world, so that going Dance with the Stars didn't make that big of a difference, or did it
Not
tip out
really.
into the normal common world?
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
people that
I had been on the competition circuit, but like I never felt like I was like I had always placed well in the competition circuit, but I was like a junior.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
I skipped to amateurs, and so I did that for only about 6 months. So I was never I knew people, I knew Val, I knew Mark, I knew several people before Karina, Louie going into it. So I guess I was like, I don't know.
But up to
I
that
don't
point,
know
it
how
seems
do
like
you
people
measure
in the
that. People knew
ballroom
me,
world
but
or some of the dance world knew you.
yeah.
But when you're Dancing with the Stars, and especially because to what you said, to your credit, it's
Yeah.
entertainment.
Yeah.
There's this whole audience that
Thing.
knows of you or knows you and that's
Yeah.
not connected to the
Yeah.
dance world at all. And was that, how was that?
Yeah. Overwhelming. Like, again, it wasn't a show that I had on my radar, genuinely.
It's not on
Like,
your bingo
I
list,
like
so you're
wanted to do So You Think You Can Dance. I'd watched it, I'd studied it, I knew what I needed to do, I knew the assignment.
yeah.
And Dancing with the Stars, I didn't know
It was a
really what I
wild
was
card.
getting into. And then, yeah, within like 3 weeks, I'm like, all of the major news outlets were doing interviews for. Um, it was just it was like culture shock a little bit. And then I'd moved to LA. That was the first time I'd been in LA, or moved outside of Utah, been on my own for the first time. It was just a lot all at
That's a
once.
lot of change and transition. Again, coming back to kind of mental health and how things spin and present, it's like that's a lot of change
It was a lot
in
of
all,
change.
like physically moving.
Yeah. And I expected myself to just be able to,
Pick it all up. There's
yeah.
no grace. You
No.
can't. You don't know what it's like to be. I'm gonna say it in my
Yeah.
own words, like kind of like famous. Who
Yeah.
knows how to do that? There's nobody coaches you or teaches you. You don't just say pause. Let me try that
No.
again. You're just like, here we are.
And I think the idea of fame is so unnatural to me. Like, it is so unnatural to have this idea of like worship, and we have that worship culture in America because people who are famous are put on this pedestal, and it's so unnatural. Like, there's nothing organic about it to me, in my opinion. Like, it's just such a weird thing. Like, and it's nice to feel like you're being um seen and noticed for your skills, but like, it's so out of proportion in my mind of like, this is so not normal.
Did
So at 19, it was just really weird. Like, I didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't resonate with this feeling of being famous. I didn't resonate with I'm
it's
like,
kind of a job, and you go to work and you do your thing, but then
yeah.
outside of that, everybody. I'm
Yeah.
curious because you've talked about your faith a little bit. How where was there this? Was there any conflict or was there challenges when it comes to faith and Dancing with the Stars and that whole realm? Were you able to?
I think that was a huge piece. I think it was partly why I was so resistant to accepting fame or accepting this idea of this persona of me, because um I was so anxious about the idea of getting caught up in fame or getting caught up in, this persona, because I knew who God was, and I knew who I wanted to be as a daughter of God, and I knew, sounds cheesy but true, I knew that that was true.
Yeah.
And
Not. Can I just say not
this
cheesy?
okay, thanks. And this whole world was just not
Yeah.
true.
It's
Like, it's
worldly.
such a
It's not that it's bad. It's just worldly,
it's
right?
worldly, but it's also it's a whole industry based off of opinions. Like, it's a whole industry based off of artificial measures of worth and artificial measures of like importance and level of importance.
And
And
even though everybody's they really are talented, I feel like, and you can maybe tell me if I'm right or not, there's a lot of walking facades. There's a lot of what
yeah.
you see.
Yes.
Behind the scenes, if you actually did the real BTS, right? Like
Yeah.
the behind the scenes, not the cutesy stuff, but the what is falling apart and what people are having to manage and deal with behind the scenes in their relationships. I mean, nowadays we sort of have that because it just cannot be, but it's sort of like the worship of the perfection and what you see. And when you're around it and you're
Yeah.
like, there's, even when you're talking about So You Think You Can Dance, right, there's so much casting and there's so much.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of my friends who've been American Idol were like, you would die if you knew how much, like, there's
Casting.
so little of me just actually singing
Yeah.
what I want to sing or dancing what
Yeah.
I want to dance.
Yes.
There is something to be said about this juxtaposition, or this sort of like this place that is like, I know who I am, I know I'm God, I know whose I am, I know where my value is, and this whole what we just described, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sort of spinning by each other. And can you have both? I've seen some people do it really, really well. I think it's hard though. I think this is one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I want to ask you. I think it's a hard space, and there's expectation, and people want to talk about your clothes, and they want to talk about
Yeah.
what you are or aren't wearing if you're
Yeah.
a certain member, and they want to talk about, I don't know, they just feel like they have the right to be invested.
Yeah.
If you're not religious, but if you are religious, now you're like this beacon
Yeah.
of like religious. You're not just a dancer, right? I would imagine,
Yeah.
but now you're the Mormon dancer or the
Oh,
LDS
yeah.
dancer, and that's
Right.
got to feel like wild. Like never asked
Yeah.
for, never really wanted, but like can't help that
I
you're
was
there.
okay. I think I was okay with that part to an extent because I don't know. I remember feeling like there's no one cool. Like there's no one like staying true to their values that goes into that world that I'd seen up until that point. And so I think there was something exciting to me about the idea of like I can
I can
be
hold
different
both. Yeah.
and I can go into that world and I can hold true to my values and show that like we're not weird. Like we're normal, but also like I think there is the reality of my beliefs of that, and it's still like there is a reality of a creator in heaven, um and I think that's important and that matters, and for me to be able to stay true to that, I think felt powerful. You know, it
Love
felt
that.
like no, there is so much more to this life than what we worship in our culture many times and in America many times. Um, and I think that to me felt, and it still does, like that feels true and powerful. And I think that didn't, that didn't bother me to be
It
known
almost
as
like
that.
held you. It sounds like it was an anchor
100%.
for you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit because thank you for being so open and
Yeah.
vulnerable. I feel like not everybody gets to hear this side of Chelsie Hightower, the dancer, so I appreciate you. I think it's very relatable. One of the other things that I really love and what I want to showcase on the Belonging Place is when people take their learned experiences, their hardships, their I wish I would have, you said a few times, I wish I would have known this or that. And instead of just thinking about it or even writing about it, they decide to do something about it. And ooh, I didn't think I was going to get emotional, but you decided to look at the girls behind you and you wanted to invest in helping them to feel differently than how you felt when you were younger.
Yeah.
Ooh, we're going to stop
I
having
know,
me
you're gonna make
talk
me
so
cry.
that you can talk. And you created a business. I know the business side is the secondary to what you wanted. Can you talk to us a little bit about Inside Out?
Yeah.
What it means to you and
Yeah.
why you put it together and
Yeah. And like I said, like I know my experience is unique. That most girls are probably not experiencing, but I can't say that because I don't know. I know that my experience was like quite intense. Um, but I, but I, but the pain was real and the struggle was real, um, and I look back at all of the things that I've learned since then. And when I left LA, and part of why Dancing with the Stars was beautiful and challenging at the same time, and trying to not just balance the fame and the how many people were watching that show at the time, still big show. But I didn't know,
Yeah.
stepping into this like, wow, okay, this is a big thing. Not only balancing that, but also balancing this internal struggle that, and this perfectionism that I was dealing with, this these measures of worth and these measures of expectation that I felt. And I look back and I learned since then, like, man, had I known what I know now, of course I would be able to handle that differently, but obviously that isn't the case. But there is a lot of me that I'm like, I wish someone could have told me that. I wish someone could have told me the things that I so firmly believed that aren't true. And I wish someone could have told me that my worth was never changing. I wish someone could have told me I had room to make mistakes. And I wish I would have known. I wish someone could have told me.
Yeah.
And that would have saved me a lot of pain and heartache and fear and pressure and
That grace we talked about, you could have had more of that, right?
yeah, still can, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I still am very hard on myself. Still a process that I'm working through. But so I looked at when I moved home, I looked at sort of my journey in dance and everything, and I was disappointed with how things ended with Dancing with the Stars for me. Not that externally anything was wrong, but it was for me. I was still struggling with the thing that I really, really, really wanted to overcome, which was anxiety. Now I know, okay, that's not like a realistic thing always to expect, but I felt like I'd failed myself in certain ways. And I looked at all of the factors that were playing into it that I thought, man, if that was different or if this had changed or if I'd known this, that would have made a huge difference in my whole dance journey. So I started a camp called Dance Elevated, and that was the beginning of like starting to understand how what I went through and how to help. But that was just like, I just wanted dancers to come and feel safe and seen, no matter what skill level they were at, no matter how good they were. I just wanted them to feel good and safe.
And that thing we talked about at the beginning, the movement and the joy and the expressing your feelings through
Like,
dance, right?
Yes. And like celebrating the beauty of dance. So I started that, and that included mental health seminars at, well, one mental health class and then a sports psychology class. And then that evolved into a dancewear line. And now it's evolving into something new, which is more getting into the actual education of trying to help dancers with real education and neuroscience and mental health tools and things that we may not even know are affecting us, and they are. And it's not to downplay, or it's not to like shame any part of the industry. It's not to shame anyone. It's just to provide more awareness so that these dancers can have a better foundation and a better sense of who they are in and out of the dance studio, that their self-worth isn't so affected by all of these external factors.
And still, you can be an elite, right? Because what we don't want to say is like,
Yes.
if you work on your mental health and if you work on yourself, you can be an
Don't
okay
care
dancer.
about anything else.
And life is good,
Yeah.
right? No,
Yes.
you're saying, and you're existing in a world, and I say this as a therapist as well, because the industry disruptor right now in mental health is that, do we need all the medication and do we need all this, even sometimes talk therapy? And I know, like, I am a therapist, but it's like, we need to sleep more. We need to
Yeah.
eat better, fuel our bodies, and we need to move more as a whole
Yes.
society before we need to add, right? So like,
Yeah.
as a dancer, you're coming and you're giving back to people and you're saying, hey, let's make sure we have the basic building blocks.
So that you can be
So-
excellent. Like,
yes.
this isn't
So that you can be excellent. This is what I want to add and
that
say.
you can whatever your motivation is, whatever your goals are, that you can have the stability and the foundation to be able to pursue that, because we're also not all motivated by the same thing. I might want to be excellent, while someone else just wants to have a good time and express themselves, and both of those
be a part of a team or a group, and
and
neither one of those are
great.
right or wrong. Also, if you have this better whole wellness, when your ticket is punched at 20, your life is not over. It is
Yes.
not death,
Yes.
right?
It's a new
been
chapter,
this
and it's
greatest journey,
beautiful.
and there's
Yeah.
a new beginning.
Yes.
And there's a new entry.
Yes.
This is
or
why
you get injured and you can't dance anymore. It's not, you're not over it.
you
Like,
can grieve,
just
but you
that
can also say,
chapter.
like, okay, I'm closing that chapter.
Yeah.
This is why I got emotional in asking you, because watching you figure it out, being a friend of you, watching you figure it out for
I might
yourself.
cry. It's been
And
so
then
hard.
watching you gift that back in the best way. And let's be real, like any business and everything, it hasn't been a walk in the park
Yeah.
either. The decision to say, like, I want to do it better for the next generation doesn't
Yeah.
make it all of us, just because it's good doesn't make it easy, right?
Yeah.
There's been problems all along the line.
And it's like it brings up my own stuff too, you know?
Okay, with all that and, with all of your, all the experience that you had and all the give back, maybe tell us where you are right now and where you're
Yeah.
going. And
Yeah, so it's gone from camps to products. We did have leotards that had messages inside the clothing. And that was supposed to just be this reinforcement of this message. Although I didn't feel that that was really like I need my feeling is I want and I need to hit the core
yeah, the
of
root of the issues, right?
the root of the actual thing. Any products that come thereafter are just a reinforcement to what we're promoting. So yeah, so we're going into the education space. I'm working on right now assembling mental health therapists, neuroscientists, anyone that can speak to like how does this affect us on a real neurological level, on a mental health level, on an emotional level, and how do we help to just bridge this gap of this beautiful art form and some of the pitfalls that we can experience. And this can go across the board, I should say. Like
Yeah.
this can also be in sports. This can also be in any young person that is trying to figure themselves out,
Music,
honestly.
yeah.
But who has this like competitive um element to their lives that is very positive, very good, but also can
Just the underbelly of that.
yeah, the shadow side of that. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. It's been in now 3 iterations. Like I said, a challenge, but I
But a worthy
believe
cause,
it's
like
important.
watching it, yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll put in the liner, we'll put all where people can find all that.
Okay.
Chelsea, if you could go back
Yeah.
to, I'm gonna pick 16-year-old
Mm.
Chelsea, knowing what you know now and knowing that
Yeah.
it's not all figured out now,
Yeah.
but that you have a lot more
Yeah.
than you had then,
Mhm.
what would you say to her?
Like, really, like everything's gonna be okay. I know that right now it feels like do or die. It feels like you have to hit this mark um, in order to survive in certain ways. Um, and it's okay that you feel that way, and it's also going to be okay. Um, and all of the struggle and the challenge is all a part of life, and it's all okay.
I would tell her, like, what you've already said now as an adult, like, your worth is unending, unchanging.
Mm.
It doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you produce. I would tell you today,
Mm-hmm.
hey, Chelsea, it doesn't matter how much you produce or do or give back or how much you want to, like, make the world a better, safer place. Like, none of that changes your value where you sit right now today in your life.
Mm.
Like, the value you create in your friendships, in people that you love, in your family, like, it's enough. All of that is icing on the cake.
Mm.
So while you're figuring out how to make your splash on the
Yeah.
world, just know that, like, you don't have to produce any of that to be, like, enough.
Thank
you know?
you.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with anybody while as we close this about belonging, about connection?
Um, I don't know. This took a really different turn. I didn't expect us to talk about my dance journey so much, but it's been great. I love the idea of belonging, connection, and what that truly means. Um, that yeah, but like this differentiation between belonging and fitting in, and that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Of like, the more you betray and sacrifice yourself, the more you're getting away from belonging. Um, and just coming into this space of like being okay wherever you're at, showing up as you are,
Yeah.
wherever you're at, being messy.
This
And
reminds me, I have I just put it on my Instagram, but I have a quote that I just put up the other day, And I'm going to read it and ask you what you.
I think I saw it. I think I loved it.
Yeah, it says sometimes the things we doubt the most have the power to connect with others in ways that we never expected.
Yeah, I love that.
So this artist is a guy who like draws charcoal on ice, and one of his very first projects like broke, and he ended up. It's a beautiful, but he didn't want to like talk about it or share it because he thought it was like this big failure. And his wife said, "This is beautiful," and he talks about how from the help of his wife and from like this thing that he didn't think was beautiful is beautiful, and it's connected so many people. And I guess I want to gift that back to you. I think when you look back and you see all the things that were Chelsie, and when you look around, I think like all of the broken and all of the maybe like shame and all the heartache, I would say like all of that has connected you to people in big and bold and brave ways. I think when people look back on your life, they're not going to see very much of any of that. I think they're just going to see how much you loved and cared and how much good you put into the world. And
That's
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Chelsie.
Thank you.